Hey, what's going on everyone? Jay's 2 cents here, and yeah, there's an Alienware on the desk. Don't freak out. I kind of am curious as to what's changed with the company since the last time I have used anything by Alienware, which goes all the way back to the year 2005. It has been 18 years since I have taken a look at anything from Alienware. And the reason why I'm looking at it today is full transparency. They had reached out to us about doing pre-rolls on our channel, and I have a very strong conviction that I will not put pre-rolls on our channel for anything that we have not used or at least think is good. So I wanted to try the unit out firsthand. They sent it to me. I've spent the last several weeks looking at this unit, and we're gonna talk about it today. And then at the end of the video, we're gonna give my conclusions and what I plan on doing with that partnership that they reached out with.
The Kraken series AIOs from NZXT come in many shapes and sizes to fit your CPU needs. The Kraken Elite series RGB coolers feature a 2.36-inch 640 by 640 customizable LCD screen, showing system info or custom images and GIFs for a custom look. F-series RGB fans and a single breakout cable for simplified installation. If low-key is more your thing, the Kraken Elite series also comes in a black non-RGB edition while retaining the amazing pump screen. To see the full lineup of new Kraken Elite and non-Elite coolers from NZXT, follow the link in the description below.
Okay, so first things first, this is the Alienware M16. They also have, I believe, an M17 and an M18. So basically it's a 16-inch laptop. Now, Alienware has always been known as a gamer brand. In fact, the two Alienware products I owned back in 2005 was I had an Area 51 gaming desktop, which had the alien head on the front, and it was the steel internal chassis with a 120 AIO, and it was nothing super crazy to write home about. It was a Pentium D. I mean, it was nothing great. And then I had the Aurora laptop, and that was a thick boy that had double stacked DVD rewrites, and it had a desktop AMD CPU in there, which also overheated and melted and killed itself inside of a year. There's a reason why they stopped doing desktop CPUs back then, although Alienware was one of the enthusiast brands that really sort of pioneered that. So I was intrigued today for nothing more than just seeing what's happened with the brand. Now, the elephant in the room, Alienware is expensive. And with that premium name comes with a premium price. But what's at least different about Alienware, before we get into the actually objective part of the review, is it's not just a Clevo or a Tom Fang rebrand. It is designed by Alienware, and the chassis and all of that is in-house. Okay, for specs, one of the things I was interested in is not that just that it's Alienware, but it's also an all AMD system. So it's an AMD Ryzen 9 7845HX, which is the middle option for the AMD CPUs. You can get a 7745 and a 7945. It also has 32 gigabytes of 4800 megahertz DDR5. It is the middle option. There actually is a 16, a 32, and a 64 gig option. So this is the middle option for that. It's got the AMD 7600M XT, which is also the lowest option for the GPU offerings. It's also the only AMD offering when it comes to AMD discrete GPUs in the Alienware lineup. Everything else going forward is an NVIDIA option, so I just want to point that out. That also makes this one of the cheapest models that you can possibly get, so keep that in mind. It also has the AMD integrated 610, the AMD 610 internal GPU, which it's gonna switch to when it's not using anything that needs discrete power, and that's for battery savings, heat savings, and it's not gonna use the discrete if it's not needed. We'll talk about switching back and forth between discrete and the iGPU in a moment. But for storage, it has a Kioxia 1 terabyte NVMe drive, which is their second lowest option. Their lowest option is a 500 gigabyte, and then it goes all the way up to multiple 4 terabytes, which you can spend thousands of dollars on if you wanted to. And the screen, there's multiple options on the screen. This is also, again, the entry-level option. So this is a 16-inch QHD Plus, which is a 2560 by 1600, 165 hertz, 3 millisecond Comfort View Plus with 100% sRGB. It is the lowest option. But the next option up goes up to 240 hertz, and then goes into DCI EP3 specs, and it's more for like content creation and editing and stuff like that. So you get the faster refresh rate, but paired with the 7600M XT, the faster refresh rate really doesn't mean anything. In fact, this refresh rate has a variable refresh for FreeSync of 60 to 165. So as long as we're hitting 60 hertz, or 60 FPS in our games, we're gonna get really smooth gameplay just because of the FreeSync. Now the keyboard is actually the highest spec keyboard. This is a Cherry MX ultra low profile mechanical keyboard with per key RGB lighting. Per key lighting is a nice function. I just left the lighting off on this laptop. But spec wise, it comes out to a total of $1,799 US, putting it in a pretty competitive price category when it comes to other models that are available on the market in that price point. And we'll do some comparisons in a moment. Now aesthetics, it's a very rubberized finish. So I'm very happy with the fact that it's this rubberized finish because it's very resistant to oils. Dirt and debris and dust are gonna stick to it, but it wipes right off. It's also gonna be very scratch resistant. The back on here, as you can see, the lighting is currently on. It's got this nice ring lighting around the rear exhaust vents. And then a lot of our ports and stuff are actually located on the back. One of my favorite things about the layout of this particular laptop is there are no ports on the right side of the laptop whatsoever. Now, left-handies, I'm sorry, all the ports are gonna be on the left or on the rear. So if you're left-handed, you gotta put your hand farther away. You'll be interacting with your ports. But on this side of the laptop, and we'll show during the teardown, they actually utilize the fact there's no ports here to put more fans and exhaust on this side of the laptop. But that way you have no cables coming out where your mouse hand would be. Now on the left side of the laptop, we have a spring door for our RJ45, we have a USB 3.0 and a combo jack. And on the back of the unit, we have two USB-C displays. We have a USB 3, an HDMI, a mini display port, and a full-size SD card, of course, with our barrel connector for our charger. Now, speaking of power, it's 108 watt TDP on this GPU, about 208 watts of what it actually pulls. But we have a 330 watt AC adapter here, which I'm 100% positive means they're using one power brick for all of the potential variations that you could build this up to the RTX 4080. I think there might even be a 4090, at least a 4080. There's no reason we need a 330 watt power brick for a 7845HX and a 76MXT discrete GPU. But in terms of weight, this laptop comes in at on our scale of 2,990 grams, or just over 6.5 pounds. And the power brick comes in at 1,350 grams, or about 3 pounds. So we are talking nearly 10 pounds of laptop weight. So if you're wondering about build quality, it is extremely robust. It's extremely, like, there's no creaking, there's no flexing. It is a solid unit. So yeah, 10 pounds in your backpack for a fairly efficient unit here. Let's talk about upgradability. That is the #1 killer of a laptop as far as I'm concerned. If they're soldered in parts or you can't open it up and service it yourself, warranty discussion aside, then it's a terrible design in my opinion. So all you need to open up the bottom of this laptop is just a small Phillips head screwdriver you would find in any electronics toolkit like an iFixit or anything else. Once you remove the perimeter screws, it just unsnaps pretty simply. You don't have to like use any pry tools and put marks or anything on there. And once you open it up, you're gonna notice that there are two full-size 2280 M.2 slots. One of them is being utilized in this build with a single 1 terabyte. If you spec'd with multiple M.2s, they would be using both of those. And you have also an additional 2230 available to you on one side where the fans are, but you are limited to a 2230 because of the fact that it's facing the fans and you can't put a longer SSD in there. Now there are SSDs now that are as small as 2230 because of how dense the chips are getting. So you could probably even get a 500 gigabyte drive in there. But one thing you're gonna notice is a lot of fans underneath. We even have a cross-flow fan for the RAM, which is kind of nice to see. It's just a small low profile fan that is blowing air right at the RAM, which is nice because this RAM does not have heat sinks on it, and it's actually like a budget RAM. It's just green PCBs that they put a black cover over so you don't see it through the ventilation on the bottom of the case. No heat sinks or anything on there, and very generic labeling. But it is DDR5, 4800 megahertz, 216 gig SODIMM sticks, as we've already talked about. Now, there's a pretty beefy cooling solution on here, and it's a unique design in that the motherboard is inverted. So what that means is that, no, we did not invert over a MIG in an F14. Basically have M.2 ports and RAM on the back side of a motherboard. The GPU and CPU are on the inside of the motherboard, sandwiched between the keyboard and the mainboard itself, with the cooling solution also sandwiched in there. So if you were to try and repaste this, it's also one of those things that Dell is gonna 100% try and void your warranty if you try to service it like that. Obviously there was no little stickers to puncture on the bottom of this unit, whether or not it is a retail unit, by the way. It was actually sent to us retail. It looks like you can open it up without voiding any sort of warranty stickers, which aren't even legal in the United States and most of Europe anyway, but I have no idea what's waiting for you as you start to tear it apart. Let's go ahead and talk about performance. These numbers are going to be somewhat arbitrary, and what I mean by that is unless I have something very comparable to compare it to, which is another 2560 by 1600 QHD plus screen, I'm not able to compare it to any other numbers. So I'm basically just showing these to you to give you an idea of what performance is like when it comes to particular benchmarks or games. You can use those numbers to sort of compare it to whatever device you're using now that you might be considering upgrading from to see If you have the same title, you can run it with the same settings and say, hey, this is what my performance is like. So these are what those numbers look like. So like I said, these numbers without another comparable laptop spec-wise to compare it to, I guess, really are fairly arbitrary, but at least it's a point of data that you can use to determine whatever you want to determine out of that. But the reason why I run these benchmarks is not just to see what's the performance like, it's what's the thermals like. Thermals are another point of contention when it comes to small form factor anything. When it comes to Cinebench, we know Cinebench is one of those titles for CPU testing that we don't care a whole lot about the number as much as we care about the temperature. It really is just a dynamometer for your CPU to put a full load on it to see what the temps are going to do. And the second you fire up the test, immediately 100.3C. Immediately. Just, I mean, like that. Now it boosts all the way up to 4.65-ish gigahertz, give or take 50 megahertz. Sometimes it's 4.6, sometimes it's 4.69. And it stays there even at 100C for about 15 minutes to where then it starts to drop down to 4.3 gigahertz, but still at 100C. So what we're seeing there is heat soak eventually making its way into other components in the system that might start getting warm, which can be affecting some of that throttling outside of just the GPU core temp by itself. Now, 100C on any AMD CPU is pretty hot. It's kind of the norm these days. Technically, it's within spec for the CPU. But no one's comfortable seeing 100C. In fact, many laptops on the market today are operating in the low 90s, upper 80s, low 90s, depending on the cooling solution for it, which has me wondering, what would the 7945HX do in this same situation? When it comes to regular CPU tasks, opening up a bunch of tabs or going to YouTube and having other programs up and running and things loading in the background, monitoring that through hardware monitor shows that it sits anywhere in the low 60s to mid 80s depending on the task that it's doing. Running a test like Geekbench, it sat in the upper 70s to low 80s. But one thing I want to point out, it took the fans nearly 60 seconds to start to ramp up once it hit 60C. Now that's all has to do with the particular settings that the laptop in the mode that it's in. So all of my testing was done in the performance mode. There's a quiet, there's a balance, there's a performance, and then there's a max. Max is just max fan speed. And now I could have tested in max fan speed, but I don't think anyone uses their laptop in max fan speed mode. So I left it in performance, which means it's supposed to push the clocks where they can go based on the thermal solution. I find that the fan curve is extremely slow to respond when you're in performance mode. However, once the fans did ramp up, the temperatures did not come down. So that's important to note. One other thing I want to note regarding cooling when it comes to gaming is the fact that when we are gaming on this laptop, you'll notice the bottom has this sort of a circular O-ring seal around it. Now we have a little bit of a gap in the front and on the rear. The sides are completely sealed. So I believe this is sealed off the way that it is because they're trying to limit the amount of hot air coming out of the side being recirculated back through the cooler. So what that led to was some pretty significant, in my opinion, airflow restriction. What I mean by that is when the system was gaming and the computer was flat on a perfectly flat table like this, you could feel the air blowing out the sides. But the second I lifted it up, I felt significantly more air start coming out. Now, that's not a scientific number to say significant. Significant is not a value, but significant is a perception, it is a notice. And I'm telling you right now, my first thought was, will I lead to better temperatures if I lift it up? And the answer is yes. I actually dropped from 82C on our hotspot temp on our 7600 MXT and a 68 on our global. So they call it global for all of the dies kind of like averaged together, and then the hotspot is the hottest reported temperature on the die. We dropped from 82 on the hotspot and 68 on the global down to 77 on the hotspot and 65 on the global. So we did lose some temperature and fan noise, I want to point out. The fans actually ran lower when I did this. And it was lifted up about this far, maybe about 50 millimeters was how far I lifted it up off the table. Now, if I had wanted to be truly scientific, I would have had to have locked the fans at a certain RPM to say, okay, here's what the temperature was with them at 90% fan speed, and then here's what it was with it lifted up at the same 90% fan speed. But the user experience for most people is gonna be set a mode and forget it. So I just left it out of the box settings to see what will happen to the performance mode by simply lifting it up. And it was less acoustics, less fan RPM, and less temperature. So that tells me that my worry about this being not enough airflow through those gaps is indeed affecting performance, at least temperature performance. We did not get any more clock speed. I want to point that out right now. No more clock speed out of it. It was the same performance in terms of what our results were, but it led to less noise and less heat. Now let's talk about discrete graphics and switching back and forth between discrete and iGPU. What was unexpected is the fact that the system will completely hang for up to 3 seconds as it does it. That is not the experience I had on my Corsair Voyager, which is also an AMD CPU and an AMD discrete GPU with an AMD iGPU. That was pretty seamless back and forth. So I don't know what the settings that are causing that in this particular system, but every time you launch a game, expect to hang. Every time you leave the game, expect to hang. And anytime that you load an application that uses the discrete GPU, expect to hang. And that hang gets extremely annoying. Now, of course, you can go into the settings and turn off the iGPU entirely to where you're only using the discrete GPU, but then what you're gonna be dealing with there is lower battery life if you're worried about battery life. Now, I did not test this on purely the battery. The reason for that is the fact that one, it's an 86 watt hour battery, so it's not even the full size 99, which you could get away with. In my particular use case in testing, it had always been in a office environment. So this is where my test is lacking in that I don't have data for you on how many hours it will last when you're just sitting on the battery. But I can tell you right now, in the time that I've been filming this video, which is, I don't know, we're probably 25 minutes or so into filming, maybe 30 minutes with some pauses and stuff, I have been sitting here at the desktop, just like this, not doing anything else. It was fully charged when we started this video and it's at 73% right now. It's fallen fast. Now again, I am in the performance preset. PC and battery life have never been a love story. I think most people know this. If battery life is the ultimate end-all goal for you, then you need to go buy a MacBook. Everyone knows this by now. It's getting better on PC, however, the CPU is a high-end part coupled with a discrete GPU. And so the battery life is gonna suck. Fun fact, this is not an Origin ad, I swear. It's just our shop laptop that we've had kicking around here forever. This one is sitting at 73% and this one is sitting at 80. All right, so a couple final thoughts. I'm gonna start with the screen. The QHD Plus is kind of nice. I mean, it's 2560 by 1600, which means it's just the same as a 1440p, only you have a few extra, 160 pixels more vertical height, which is how you're getting the 1600. I find it to be a bit dim. So dim that I found myself going like, why isn't it brightening up? Thinking it was supposed to go brighter. It is like half the brightness of so many of our other laptops that we have here. And that's my #1 complaint about this laptop so far, is that it's extremely dim. The glare, even though it's a matte finish, became a problem because I could not drown out the glare with the brightness of the panel. And that's just in an office environment here. And I'm not talking about our studio lights, I'm talking about our overhead, our regular lights. Second of all, the trackpad, it's a little on the small side. Using trackpads, I'm used to laptops having much bigger trackpads these days, giving you more range of motion to move things around the screen. I found myself very often right-clicking on something, thinking I was left-clicking. It's smooth. I'm able to move the cursor around very nice and easily, but my problem ultimately is that the trackpad is a bit on the small side. It's a personal gripe, but it's my gripe nonetheless. The keyboard feels slightly smaller than a desktop keyboard, so I was making a lot of typing errors at first, but once I got indexed and comfortable with it, typing on it was pretty nice. The mechanical keys, I mean, it's very nice sounding. One other gripe that I have that's very superficial, but just noticeable, is one, when you push the power button, there's a good long delay between when you push it and when anything happens. So you find yourself pushing it a bunch of times and sometimes turning the laptop back off when it's trying to boot. The several times I thought it was dead because I pushed the button and nothing happened. It just took that long to turn on. Now the last thing I want to talk about here is audio. They're downfire 2-watt speakers right here in the corners. They're very, very loud actually, and they're very clear. Don't consider this to be an audiophile's review of a laptop speaker. That would actually be an interesting video series to watch. But anyway, they are good enough to where if you're dealing with the fans blaring, you forgot your headphones or something, you could easily listen to this and you're not gonna be lost or drowned out by the atmosphere.
Take your work and gaming experience to the next level.
I know this isn't translating to you, but Phil's eyes just went.
High-end display.
But they're good enough. Okay, the other thing, let's talk about price. You have to compare this to other things that exist in the same price category. So if we consider price, we have got a few competitors here that I put together. So Origin PC, yes, this is an Origin laptop. I'm not comparing it to this. These specs do not compare at all. But if we talk about the Eon 16S, that's an i9 13900H, an RX 4060, 16 gigs of 4800, so half the RAM of this. Remember what I said, I would order this with less RAM and put your own RAM in anyway. A 1 terabyte storage, which is an MP600 drive, which is a Corsair drive. A 16-inch QHD 240 hertz. So it's from 165 to 240, but 2560 by 1440, not 1600. 1669, so $30 less, and not the one I'm pointing at, but the laptop I'm talking about. $30 less than this one. Falcon Northwest, another brand I love, disqualified because their cheapest laptop is $2,500. So Lenovo has a Slim. So the Lenovo Legion has a 13900H, an RTX 4070 laptop GPU, 16 gigabytes, so again, half of the 32, but 5200 megahertz versus 4800, a 1 terabyte NVMe, as well as the same QHD panel, QHD Plus at 2560 by 1600, but 240 hertz at 1749. $50 more than the Alienware, but you're getting the Intel 13900H. I don't know how it compares to the 7845. I think that'd be more direct compared to the 7945, personally. And a much faster GPU than what's in here, $1799 versus $1749 for the Lenovo. Yeah, there's updates, I get it. iBuyPower, look, that's another brand you're just going to determine whether or not you would buy from on your own, but 13900HX, which is a higher tiered 13900 mobile with technically overclocking available to it, RX 4070, 16 gigs of 5600 megahertz DDR5, 1 terabyte Western Digital Blue NVMe, so I feel like the drive's a little lacking, but it's a full HD 145, so that's a 1080p screen, but that's $1849. So I'd still take the Lenovo over the iBuyPower. I just wanted to throw that brand out there because they're kind of everywhere. There's obviously brands out there that are giving you more for the same price, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think the 32 megahertz that this unit, or the 32 gigabytes that this unit comes with in RAM is enough to make up for the price point. So that's why I've basically kind of responded and said, thank you in your interest in our channel, but I'm not gonna go forward with advertising this unit. I think Alienware's biggest hurdle is Dell. And I think everyone knows this. I think Dell is one of those brands that have so many horror stories regarding customer service and just people being unhappy with the general direction that Alienware's gone since the acquisition. And that was that acquisition took place not long after my last Alienware that I ever owned, which, like I said, is 18 years ago. So anyway, it's been nearly 20 years since I looked at an Alienware product. I'm very pleased with the build quality. I'm very pleased with just everything about it really does seem to encompass what Alienware's roots are about in terms of just this kind of a spacey, high-tech thing. The problem is you're paying a premium for it, a pretty hefty premium. Yeah, and like I said, there are brands on there that I couldn't even get into this category because they were too expensive, but they advertise themselves as that. They're not going after that mainstream consumer. They're going after that enthusiast. And this laptop can range from $1,500 to like $4,000 or $5,000, depending on how you spec it. So there you go. I tried to be a little bit more in-depth with this video than I have in the past. I've used this laptop a lot more than I have previous laptops in the past, just to try and get acquainted with it as much as possible. I'd like to think my opinion might be a little different if they hadn't spec'd it with the bare bones, lowest end GPU that they could put in it. I would have rather had like a little bit higher end GPU and maybe a one tier lower CPU and 16 gigs of RAM to get more overall performance out of it than having a CPU powerhouse with 32 gigs of RAM that would never be utilized in the situation in which I would use a laptop. But I didn't spec it. So there you go. Like I said, I'm not gonna go forward with the pre-roll on it. I think the laptop unit itself is a great unit. I think those that are fans of Alienware would definitely still consider it. I think their biggest hurdle overall is something that cannot change, and that's just Dell. That's the Dell aspect. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Sound off down below how you feel about this unit, if you've used one, if you have Alienware, or what's your most recent Alienware experience been? People can learn from your comments as much as they can learn from our video. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.